Imagine getting the very thing you said you wanted and feeling uneasy instead of relieved, not because the person is cold, not because they are confusing, not because you're being ignored, manipulated, or kept in some painful in-between. The opposite. They are consistent. They are clear. They text back. They do not play games. They do not disappear when things get real. They do not make you guess where you stand. And instead of finally relaxing, something in you starts whispering, "Why does this feel off?" That reaction is much more important than it looks. Most people assume they understand their relationship problems because they can name what hurts them. Mixed signals hurt. Rejection hurts. Emotional inconsistency hurts. Being led on hurts. Carl Jung would agree that pain leaves deep patterns in the psyche. But Jung would push the question further. He would ask not only what hurts you, he would ask what feels unfamiliar enough to make you pull away from what is actually good. That is where the subject begins. Because many people do not only struggle with toxic love, they struggle with healthy love. Not in theory, not in the way they describe themselves to friends. In the body, in the nervous system, in the private reaction that appears when calm affection replaces emotional chaos. You may already know this feeling. You meet someone who is emotionally available, and instead of being drawn in cleanly, you become cautious. Not wise cautious, more like internally suspicious. A part of you starts looking for what must be wrong because the old signs of danger are missing. There is no hot and cold cycle, no addictive uncertainty, no need to decode every message, no big emotional storms to keep your attention locked in, just steadiness. And steadiness can feel strangely unreal when your psyche has been shaped by turbulence. That is the first hard truth. Sometimes safe love feels unfamiliar not because it lacks depth, but because your system learned to read intensity as depth. That confusion can shape an entire love life. You may say you want peace, but when peace arrives, it feels flat. You may say you want consistency, but when consistency shows up, part of you feels restless. You may say you are tired of chaos and mean it completely, but then find yourself oddly more activated by the person who keeps you uncertain than by the one who treats you well. Carl Jung would have taken that contradiction seriously. He would not reduce it to superficial bad taste in partners or simple fear of commitment. He would look beneath the pattern and ask what kind of emotional world has become normal inside the psyche. He would ask what the soul has mistaken for love because it has repeated it too long. A real-life example makes this clearer. Picture someone who has spent years attached to emotionally inconsistent people. They know the pattern is painful. They hate the waiting, the confusion, the sudden warmth followed by distance. They tell themselves they want something healthy now. Then they meet a person who is grounded, kind, and direct. This new person does not trigger panic through absence. They do not create false scarcity. They do not make love feel like a test. And yet, after a few dates, something feels missing. That word matters. Missing. Not because anything is objectively lacking, but because the old adrenaline is missing. The psychic turbulence is missing. The uncertainty that once made attachment feel alive is missing. So the person starts telling themselves a story. Maybe there is no chemistry. Maybe it is too easy. Maybe it just does not feel right. Sometimes that story is true. Not every calm connection is the right one. But very often the story is only the surface explanation for something much deeper. The psyche does not yet know how to trust what does not wound at first. This is why healthy love can feel so disorienting. It changes the emotional math. If love is calm, what are you supposed to do with all the parts of yourself that learn to organize around anxiety? If someone is available, what happens to the old self who knew how to long, chase, decode, worry, and wait? If affection is stable, what becomes of the version of you that felt most alive inside emotional suspense? These are not small questions. Carl Jung would say that the psyche adapts around repeated conditions. If emotional inconsistency shaped your attachment life, then your inner world may have learned to treat tension as intimacy, not because tension is intimacy, but because tension was the atmosphere in which attachment kept happening. Over time, the soul confuses the familiar with the real. The body learns a rhythm. The heart starts associating activation with meaning. Then healthy love arrives and breaks the old rhythm. No push-pull, no dramatic distance. No sharp drop after closeness. No emotional starvation followed by intense reward. And suddenly the whole old structure loses its familiar reference points that can make safe love feel not only quiet, but suspicious. You may notice this in very specific ways. A person texts you kindly and consistently, and instead of ease, you feel yourself becoming hyper-aware, almost like your system is waiting for the reversal. A relationship stays gentle for a few weeks, and your mind starts inventing concerns because the emotional field is too still. A person clearly likes you, and instead of feeling chosen, you begin wondering whether you are actually attracted at all. This is often where people become confused with themselves. They think their lack of panic means lack of feeling. But Carl Jung would likely say something else may be happening. Your old emotional machinery is not being fed, so you mistake the absence of dysregulation for the absence of love. That misunderstanding is costly, because it can make healthy relationships feel underwhelming, while harmful ones feel profound. And if that pattern stays unconscious, you may keep abandoning what is good in order to return to what feels emotionally legible. A lot of people know this privately, but struggle to say it out loud. They feel more chemistry with the unavailable person, more obsession with the one who creates distance, more emotional charge with the one who makes them insecure. Then they meet someone kind and wonder why their nervous system is not singing. Carl Jung will remind you that the nervous system is not a pure oracle of truth. It is also a memory system. It carries the imprint of what it is known. That means strong activation does not always mean deep alignment. Sometimes it means deep familiarity with an old wound. That distinction can change a life, because once you see it, you stop romanticizing every intense reaction as proof of a soulful bond. You begin asking a more Jungian question. What exactly is being activated in me here? Longing? Fear? Projection? The old wish to earn love through emotional labor? The hope that this time the chaos will resolve differently? Jung used the language of projection constantly because he knew human beings rarely meet one another without unconsciously loading the relationship with unfinished material. That is especially true in love. A person may not only be responding to who is in front of them, they may be responding to the whole psychic field around attachment, mother complex, father complex, abandonment wounds, inferiority, longing for rescue, the old drama of not being chosen, the old fantasy of finally being enough to stabilize another person's inconsistency. In that state, chaotic love can feel meaningful because it is carrying psychic content. It is not just a person. It is a whole theater of unresolved inner material. Healthy love, by contrast, may feel almost too plain at first because it does not hook the same complexes in the same dramatic way. That is one reason Carl Jung matters here so much. He helps explain why a peaceful person can feel less magnetic than an unstable one. The unstable one may be carrying your projections. The calm one may not. And projection, however painful, often feels emotionally vivid. That does not make it love. It makes it psychologically charged. Safe love begins asking something different from you. It asks whether you can remain in the room without emotional fireworks, whether you can let care be simple, whether you can receive something without having to earn it through pain, whether you can feel chosen without being forced into self-doubt first. That can be terrifying for a psyche trained in uncertainty, because now the struggle is gone. And with the struggle gone, the old identity begins losing one of its major functions. The one who waits, the one who overthinks, the one who survives emotional confusion, the one who proves devotion through endurance. If that has been your role in love for long enough, healthy love does not just offer comfort. It threatens an identity. This is why some people become restless in good relationships. Not because the relationship is dead, because the old self does not know who to be without the pain patterns that once organized connection. A simple example. Someone is dating a partner who is present, warm, and reliable. Instead of enjoying the reliability, they start feeling vaguely trapped or bored. But when they look closer, they are not bored with the person. They are bored with the absence of old anxiety. Their system had confused emotional intensity with aliveness for so long that steadiness now feels too quiet to trust. Carl Jung would likely say this is where the unconscious must become conscious. Otherwise, you will keep calling fate what is actually repetition. You will keep saying, I just don't feel it, in situations where what you really do not feel is the old chaos. And Jung's famous line belongs right here. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That line is almost a direct diagnosis of this pattern. If your unconscious associates love with unpredictability, then healthy love may keep feeling wrong until that association is confronted, not because healthy love lacks soul, because the soul has been patterned by pain. This is where another layer appears. Safe love can also expose grief. Grief for how long chaos felt normal. Grief for how much tenderness your system forgot how to receive. Grief for the years spent believing that longing was romance and emotional dysregulation was chemistry. Sometimes people pull away from healthy love not because it is boring, but because it reveals how wounded their love template really is. That revelation hurts. It hurts to realize that peace feels foreign. It hurts to realize that care feels unfamiliar. It hurts to see that what should soothe you instead leaves you waiting for disaster. But this pain is important because it is not the pain of the healthy relationship itself. It is the pain of meeting your old pattern without being able to romanticize it quite so easily anymore. That is where the real threshold stands. Not, why do I like the wrong people? The deeper question is, what in me has learned to treat emotional safety as unfamiliar and emotional instability as home? That is the question Carl Jung would care about. Because once you begin asking it, the whole issue stops being about chemistry alone. It becomes about the structure of the psyche, the memory of love, the habits of the nervous system, and the old identities that formed inside uncertainty. And until those things are brought into consciousness, healthy love may keep arriving in your life wearing the wrong costume, not as peace, as discomfort, not as relief, as suspicion, not as the answer, as something your old self still does not know how to survive. That is where this journey begins. Here is the paradox you have to face if you really want to understand this pattern. Sometimes the heart does not run from pain because it loves pain. It runs from peace because peace threatens the emotional world it already knows how to survive. Carl Jung would have understood that immediately. He would not look at your discomfort in healthy love and say, you just like toxic people, or you're afraid of commitment, and leave it there. Jung always went deeper. He looked at the unconscious structure beneath the surface behavior. He would ask what kind of inner world has been built around inconsistency, what identity has formed around longing, and why the ego feels more organized inside tension than inside genuine safety. That question takes us straight into Jung's central insight. The psyche is not drawn only to what is good. It is drawn to what is familiar, what is charged, what carries old psychic material. And this is exactly why a calm, emotionally safe relationship can feel flat, suspicious, or strangely unreal at first. Not because it lacks value, because it does not feed the old psychic machinery. A real-life example makes this clearer. Take someone who spent years in relationships where love was uncertain. Maybe affection came in bursts. Maybe the other person was warm when available and distant when vulnerable. Maybe closeness always had tension attached to it. Over time, this person becomes psychologically organized around waiting, reading signals, managing anxiety, and trying to earn continuity. Then one day they meet someone emotionally steady. The new person is consistent. There is warmth without drama, care without performance, interest without manipulation. And what happens? Part of the psyche feels relief. Another part feels disoriented. Why? Because the old self knew exactly how to live in pursuit. It did not yet know how to live in reception. Carl Jung would say that the psyche has built a structure around the old pattern. The ego, the persona, and the underlying complexes have all adapted. That means healthy love is not simply better circumstances. It is a challenge to the existing internal arrangement. Let's start with the complex. Jung used this word in a very precise way. A complex is not just a bad memory. It is a whole emotional constellation. Thoughts, feelings, sensations, expectations, and old relational meanings gather around theme, abandonment, rejection, inconsistency, shame, not being chosen, having to prove yourself. All of that can form a relational complex. Once that complex is active, you do not meet new love neutrally. You meet it through the old emotional field. So the consistent partner does not arrive in an empty room. They arrive in a psyche already trained to expect reversal, already trained to brace, already trained to read calm as temporary, already trained to think, this is where something goes wrong. That is why the discomfort can feel irrational and still be powerful. The present may be safe. The psyche may still be living in the past. Jung would also point toward projection here. This matters a lot. In painful or chaotic love, projection often runs wild. You project longing, fantasy, rescue, spiritual meaning, unresolved parental material, your own unlived tenderness, your own wish to heal old wounds. The other person becomes bigger than themselves. They carry whole worlds of psychic significance. That is one reason unstable love can feel so intense. It is not only the person, it is the projection surrounding them. You are not just attached to who they are. You are attached to what the psyche has loaded into them. But safe love often disrupts projection. A healthy person may not offer the same surfaces for fantasy. They may be too clear, too real, too emotionally present to hold the same dramatic projection. And because of that, the relationship can feel less intoxicating. Again, not because it is shallow, because it is less inflated. Carl Jung warned repeatedly about inflation. He knew that what feels spiritually or emotionally big is not always true. Sometimes it is just unconscious material swelling the experience beyond reality. Chaotic love often feels profound because it activates unresolved psychic contents with tremendous force. Healthy love may feel quieter because it is asking for contact, not inflation. That is a huge difference. Inflation feels dramatic. Contact feels simple. And if your psyche has been trained to trust drama more than simplicity, you will likely misread the difference. This is where Jung becomes incredibly useful. He helps you ask a harder question. Am I grieving the absence of passion, or am I grieving the absence of the old wound being activated? Those are not the same thing. Many people have never separated them. They think peace means boredom because they only know how to identify real love through activation. If the nervous system is not lit up, they assume the soul is not involved. But Jung would insist that the nervous system is not the soul. The body carries history. The psyche carries repetition. Strong activation may be meaningful, but it may also be old pain returning in a familiar costume. Another real-life scene. A woman dates someone emotionally available. He is kind, reliable. He calls when he says he will call. He does not make her question where she stands. Instead of sinking into relief, she finds herself becoming restless. She misses him less than she thinks she should. She starts scanning for flaws. She wonders if the chemistry is missing. Jung would not rush to invalidate her experience, but he would ask her to examine what her system has been trained to count as chemistry. Was chemistry in her old world partly anxiety, partly uncertainty, partly the rush of finally being chosen by someone difficult, partly the familiar ache of wanting to be enough for someone inconsistent? If so, then healthy love will absolutely feel different. It may feel quieter, yes, but the real question is whether the quiet is deadness or safety. That takes consciousness to distinguish. Jung's quote belongs powerfully here. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Many people call this pattern bad luck in love. Jung would call it unconscious repetition, not because you choose it in some simplistic way, because the psyche returns to what it knows until the deeper structure changes. This is also where the persona enters. A lot of people do not only adapt to chaotic love, they build an identity inside it. The longing one, the understanding one, the strong one, the one who can handle emotional ambiguity, the one who proves devotion through patience, the one who survives the confusion. That persona can become strangely stabilizing. Then healthy love arrives and removes the role. Now you are no longer the one waiting to be chosen. You are chosen. You are no longer the one decoding mixed signals. There are no mixed signals. You are no longer the one earning closeness through emotional labor. Closeness is simply there, and that can destabilize the ego more than people realize. Because if the role disappears, a deeper question appears. Who am I in love when I do not have to suffer for it? That question can feel almost unbearable to a psyche built around proving. Carl Jung would likely say that this is one place where the shadow becomes visible too. The shadow here may contain receptivity. the ability to receive love cleanly, the ability to be at ease, the ability to be soft without bracing for loss. For someone shaped by instability, these qualities may remain underdeveloped and shadowed. That means healthy love does not only feel nice, it feels exposing. It reveals how little practice the psyche has with rest, trust, and non-defensive affection. This is why calm love can trigger grief, and this part matters deeply. People often think the only pain in relationships comes from being treated badly, but sometimes the deeper pain comes when someone finally treats you well, and you realize how unfamiliar goodness has become. That realization hurts. It hurts to see how much your body trusts chaos more than peace. It hurts to discover that care feels suspicious. It hurts to notice that being loved gently is harder to receive than being wanted inconsistently. Jung would not see that grief as failure. He would see it as revelation. The psyche is finally encountering something outside the old pattern, and in doing so it becomes conscious of the pattern itself. That is painful, but it is also necessary. Because once you truly see the old structure, you can no longer romanticize it as easily. You may still crave it, but you see it. That changes everything. Jung also cared deeply about the union of opposites, and this matters here too. Many people split love into either intensity or deadness, either passion or boredom, either chaos or emptiness. But healthy love often asks for a third thing the ego has not yet learned: aliveness without threat. That is not a concept the wounded nervous system immediately understands. It has to be learned, lived, repeated, felt in the body enough times that the psyche begins to believe it. So the question is no longer, why doesn't this healthy love feel exciting enough? The better Jungian question is, what old emotional law in me still says that love must hurt, confuse, or destabilize me in order to feel real? That is the real heart of the matter. Because unless that law becomes conscious, the psyche will keep rejecting the very thing it says it wants, not out of stupidity, out of loyalty to a deeper pattern it has not yet outgrown. And that is exactly why Section 3 matters. Because once you see that healthy love feels strange not because it is wrong, but because your inner world has not fully adapted to goodness, then the work changes. Now you are no longer waiting for a magical feeling. You are learning how to stay in contact with what is safe long enough for safety to stop feeling foreign. That is the beginning of transformation, not in the fantasy. Here is the question that changes everything. When calm love feels strange, do you immediately treat that strangeness as truth? Or do you stay with it long enough to find out what it actually is? That is the whole threshold, because most people never pause there. They feel the discomfort, the lack of old intensity, the absence of familiar anxiety, and they conclude too quickly. Something is missing. There's no spark. It feels flat. It must not be right. Carl Jung would be very careful here. He would not tell you to force yourself into every calm relationship. He would not say every peaceful person is your soulmate. But he would absolutely ask whether your discomfort comes from the actual person in front of you or from the collapse of an old inner pattern that used to make love feel recognizable. That distinction is enormous, because if the discomfort is coming from the collapse of an old pattern, then what you are feeling is not evidence that the connection is wrong. It is evidence that your psyche is in unfamiliar territory. And unfamiliar territory often feels wrong before it feels safe. That is especially true in love. A real-life example. Someone is dating a kind, emotionally available partner. There is steadiness, warmth, honesty, and consistency. Nothing dramatic is happening, and that is exactly what makes them uneasy. They start noticing their mind scanning for problems. They begin wondering if they are attracted enough, if the chemistry is deep enough, if maybe they are forcing it. Meanwhile, if the same person met someone inconsistent, unavailable, or confusing, their whole system would light up instantly. Jung would say, pay attention to that, not because a quieter connection is automatically right, but because a contrast reveals your inner emotional law. The old law says, love feels intense when I am uncertain. Love feels important when I have to earn it. Love feels alive when I cannot fully relax. The new possibility says, love might also feel real when I am not fighting for it. That second possibility can feel deeply destabilizing if your identity in love has been built around pursuit, emotional labor, longing, and over-functioning. This is where the work of Section 3 begins. Not by pretending calm love already feels natural, by learning how to remain present in it without immediately sabotaging it. Carl Jung would call this conscious relation. Instead of obeying the first wave of discomfort, you begin observing it. You notice the restlessness, the urge to create distance, the strange suspicion that appears when someone is simply good to you. And rather than turning those reactions into conclusions, you treat them as psychic material. That is a profoundly Jungian move. You ask, what exactly feels strange here? What is missing, the old wound or real connection? Am I actually bored? Or am I unaccustomed to not being dysregulated? That kind of honesty is difficult, because it often reveals something painful. What you used to call chemistry may have contained a great deal of fear. That does not mean all intensity is false. Jung would never flatten life that way. Real attraction exists. Real passion exists. Real soul recognition exists. But Jung would insist that if passion is constantly fused with instability, then the psyche is not yet free. It is repeating. And repetition is not destiny. It is unconscious pattern. This is why Jung's line matters again here. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. You will keep saying, I'm just not drawn to healthy people. Or, I lose interest when things are too easy, as if that were simply your nature. Jung would challenge that. He would ask whether what you call preference is partly an unconscious loyalty to old emotional pain. That loyalty has to be seen before it can loosen. So, how do you actually work with it? First, you slow down the interpretation. This is essential. When a safe person makes you uneasy, your mind may want to turn that unease into a story immediately. They're too nice. It's too calm. There's no spark. I'm not feeling enough. Instead of obeying those thoughts instantly, you stay near the sensation itself. What does off actually feel like? Is it numbness? Or is it the absence of panic? Is it disinterest? Or is it the grief of not knowing how to organize yourself without anxiety? Is it lack of chemistry? Or is it the loss of the emotional roller coaster your body had mistaken for intimacy? These are not semantic questions. They change lives. Because if you answer them honestly, you stop throwing away good things simply because they do not trigger you in the old way. Second, you let the body learn something new through repetition. This matters because insight alone rarely changes attachment patterns. Your mind may understand perfectly well that safe love is good for you, and your body may still tense when it appears. Jung knew this too. The psyche changes through conscious experience, not just theory. So the work is relational and embodied. You stay through a few more moments of steadiness than you normally would. You let the person remain kind without immediately suspecting hidden motives. You allow consistency to repeat enough times that your system begins noticing nothing bad happened when they stayed. This sounds simple. It can be incredibly hard, because each repetition of safety may trigger the old expectation of reversal. The body may brace for abandonment, mixed signals, withdrawal, disappointment. When those things do not come, grief may rise. That grief is important. It may be grief for how unfamiliar goodness has become. Grief for how many years uncertainty felt normal. Grief for how much of your identity and love was built around surviving deprivation. Carl Jung would not dismiss that grief. He would treat it as part of transformation. The old self is being outgrown. And being outgrown is not always a clean, joyful process. Sometimes it feels like confusion, emptiness, even a temporary loss of orientation. That is one reason people often run back toward chaotic love. It restores familiar emotional map. Healthy love may be better, but chaos is easier for the old self to navigate. This is why you need patience. Not passive patience. Psychological patience. The patience to let your nervous system become less loyal to suffering. The patience to let calm affection stop feeling unreal through repeated, conscious contact. The patience to stop demanding that safety feel intoxicating immediately. A real-life scene. A man is dating someone who is present and clear. There are no emotional games. She likes him, says so, and behaves accordingly. Instead of feeling secure, he starts feeling flat. In the past, he would have interpreted that flatness as proof that the connection lacked depth. But now, because he has become more conscious, he waits. He notices that what he misses is not actually her absence. What he misses is the old adrenaline of uncertainty. Once he sees that something begins shifting, the flatness turns out not to be deadness. It was withdrawal from a familiar pattern. That kind of realization is huge. Carl Jung would likely say that this is the ego beginning to loosen its identification with an old relational complex. You are no longer fully possessed by it. You can see it. And once you can see it, you gain room to choose differently. That does not mean the old pattern vanishes overnight. It means you stop confusing it with truth. Third, you begin separating peace from emptiness. This is critical. Many people who are used to chaotic attachment do not know the difference at first. Peace can feel empty because it does not stimulate the old emotional machinery. But peace is not emptiness. Peace is simply less dramatic, less loud, less chemically gripping. Jung would say that the ego often misreads a quieter language of wholeness because it is addicted to the charged language of the complex. Healthy love is often quieter, not shallower, quieter, more spacious, less haunted, less dependent on fantasy and projection. And because of that, it may not flatter the ego in the same way. It asks for presence instead of obsession. It asks for receiving instead of proving. It asks for reality instead of projection. That is harder than many people realize. Carl Jung cared deeply about reality. He wanted the psyche to move toward what is real, not what is merely inflated by unconscious longing. That applies beautifully here. Safe love may feel less cinematic, but it is often more real. And reality can be hard to accept when the psyche has lived on fantasy-fed intensity for too long. Fourth, you tell the truth about your old identity in love. This is where the work becomes deeply personal. Who were you in chaotic love? The one who waited? The one who overthought? The one who proved devotion through endurance? The one who stayed loyal to unavailable people? The one who felt alive only when uncertain? That identity may need to grieve. Because if safe love becomes possible, that old self is no longer needed in the same way. And Carl Jung would absolutely say that transformation always includes a symbolic death. An old self-organization has to loosen. That can feel like boredom, but sometimes it is mourning. Mourning the old drama. Mourning the old role. Mourning the self who knew how to survive in pain better than receive in peace. Without that mourning, many people keep returning to familiar chaos, simply to feel like themselves again. But the point of healing is not to remain the same self in better circumstances. It is to become capable of living differently. That is exactly what safe love asks of you, not merely to choose a better partner. To become a person who can survive tenderness without distrusting it. That is the deeper transformation. Carl Jung would likely call this movement toward wholeness in relationship. The split begins to heal. Love no longer has to be fused with danger. Care no longer has to feel suspect. Stability no longer has to feel dead. The psyche learns, slowly, painfully, repeatedly, that aliveness can exist without threat. And once that starts becoming real, something beautiful happens. You stop needing chaos to feel chosen. You stop mistaking inconsistency for depth. You stop romanticizing suffering as proof of connection. Now attraction can become cleaner, more conscious, less dictated by old wounds, less ruled by projection, more able to recognize goodness without recoiling from it. That is what it means to stay long enough for safe love to feel real, not to force a feeling, to let a new emotional reality become livable. And that may be one of the deepest Jungian forms of healing in love, not finally finding a perfect person, but becoming able to remain present when love stops wounding you in the old familiar way. That is where the real shift happens. And that is where peace begins to stop feeling strange. This is the part most people never say out loud. Sometimes the hardest thing is not leaving painful love. Sometimes the hardest thing is staying when love stops being painful in a familiar way. Carl Jung would have understood that completely. He knew the psyche does not simply move toward what is good. It often moves toward what is known. And if what was known was inconsistency, longing, emotional instability, or the feeling that love had to be earned through anxiety, then safe love will not always feel like home at first. It may feel quiet, suspicious, flat, too easy, almost unreal, not because it is false, because your inner world has been trained by a different atmosphere. That is why this pattern deserves honesty, not shame. You are not broken because peace feels unfamiliar. You are meeting the emotional memory of your own attachment life. You are seeing, perhaps for the first time, how much of your idea of chemistry was tied to activation, how much of your idea of depth was tied to uncertainty, how much of your identity in love was built around surviving inconsistency rather than receiving devotion. Carl Jung would call this the unconscious becoming visible. And once it becomes visible, you have a choice. Not a perfect choice, not an easy one, but a real one. You can keep mistaking old wounds for truth, or you can begin learning the slower, stranger, more difficult language of safe love. A love that does not make you chase. A love that does not require confusion to stay alive. A love that does not demand self-abandonment as proof of feeling. That kind of love may not flatter the old self. It may not produce the same adrenaline. It may not feel cinematic in the way pain once did. But that does not make it empty. It may make it real. And that is the part your psyche is still learning how to trust. Before we close, sit with one honest question. When love feels calm, what exactly in you starts getting uncomfortable? The body? The mind? The old fear of being trapped? The old fear of being seen? Or the loss of the familiar chaos that used to tell you something important was happening? Stay with that, because your answer will show you what part of your old love pattern is still asking to be made conscious. If this resonates, write in the comments one sign you notice in yourself when someone treats you well, but part of you still wants to pull away. Not the polished answer, the real one. And if you know someone who keeps saying they want healthy love, but gets restless, distant, or confused the moment they start receiving it, share this video with them. Because sometimes the deepest healing is not learning how to survive heartbreak. It is learning how to stay when love finally stops feeling like heartbreak in disguise.